of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Again, thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Rhonda Blackburn. I am the Senior Director of Academic Services and Client Success with Strut Learning, and I have an amazing panelist with me today. So I'm going to have them each introduce themselves, and then we'll come back around to me, and then we're going to get the conversation started about micro-credentialing and CBE and what that looks like. So I'm going to turn this over to Robert. If you would like to go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Robert Kubash. I'm the Executive Director of the Digital Transformation Center here at the University of Louisville. I've been at the university now going on 5 years. In this role, kind of pseudo this role, the last 2.5, but formally the last couple months, they finally made it formal. But the bigger part of it is we've been working with Strut specifically in competency-based education, and we're incorporating that type of platform into our workforce initiative and engine, and kind of taking some of the things that we do in putting it out in the workforce and badging and micro-credentialing, as well as embedding micro-credentials into our tuition space to give the students competencies before they leave for graduation. So, you know, when they enter the workforce and the employer says, great, you have this nice education from University of Louisville, but what can you do? And then that's where the micro-credentials kind of help give them an established set of competencies that they can bring to the workforce. So that's typically where our space is operating. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Next, I would like Margaret to go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone.
Can you hear me? Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Margaret Moodian, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Massachusetts Global Campus. And I teach in the Competency-Based Education program. I've been in this role for about 8 years. I've been at UMass Global for about 10 years now. And we utilize the Strut platform and the competency-based program and absolutely love it. It's a wonderful platform, and so glad to be on this webinar today. In addition to my role as an associate professor, and what I do in the role is I serve on program council. So we cover a lot of what programs we'll be developing and what we'd like to see updated in the programs. I also serve on doctoral dissertation committees, sometimes as chair as well. And I'm very involved in the community and lead several nonprofits. So I like to keep in touch with what I'm teaching. And so when I'm involved in the community, I'm able to apply that to our students. So really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Margaret. And Laura, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yes, good afternoon/morning to all of you. My name is Dr. Laura Galloway. I'm one of the associate deans for the School of Business and Professional Studies at University of Massachusetts Global. I, in this role, oversee essentially our curriculum and assessment process, as well as our curriculum development, which includes our CBE program. And so actually was one of the first ones to develop our first competency-based program, actually course for us to get approval from the Department of Education. And Margaret and her team and I have brought that program from its very first attempt to something that's pretty great today. And Strut has been with us, partners with us as we've learned, as our students have learned, and as our instructors have learned how to create systems where our students are really thriving in the classroom. And in addition, from the micro-credentialing standpoint, I've been working with a lot of our business partners for the last 2 years to develop and cultivate micro-credentialing and certificate programs mostly for our business partners to be able to bring them into a credit-based situation with us as well. So it's a mutual benefit as well. And so that's been really great. CBE, competency-based education, is the best entryway we have found with our business partners to access and support their professional development and education of their employees as well. So more on that, but it's definitely been a huge opportunity for us in the past couple of years.
Thank you. As you can tell, an amazing panel, and can't wait to pick their brains when it comes to micro-credentialing and CBE. One of the things that, as you know, we kind of prepare for this webinar, we talked about what is a micro-credential. I mean, I think a lot of people have different concepts and definitions. And I know Robert and I were talking about that earlier today. And so I would like to pick his brain a little bit about what is, or how does Louisville actually look at micro-credentialing, and how do y'all define that?
Well, the University of Louisville considers micro-credentialing something that's more so less than a certification, less than a certificate, but something that displays a competency in the form of a badge or whatever the case may be. I'm retired military, so in the terms that I use for them, it's really a training session that's designed over a period of time. We'd like to try to get them to 20 to 40 hours that help the student or the person develop a competency that can be exemplified in the workplace in some sense. A lot of people used to call them, the idea of soft skills. People needed to have soft skills in order to get in the workforce. This is one way to visualize some of those types of skills. And that's the way that we kind of see it. We also partner with IBM, Google, Cisco, and stuff like that for their industry micro-credentials. And we try to embed those in our tuition programs as homework. So that way, as a student finishes the course, they also get credit for the micro-credential because it's coming out. And so, to reinforce what I said earlier about when they go to an employer and they say, I finished my degree, and the employer's like, great, now what? What can you do? You also have this list of micro-credentials that are embedded in the curriculum to demonstrate competencies instead of just knowledge. So, and those competencies translate to work that's being done actually within the organization, so that, I believe it helps them get promoted. It makes a better teammate, and it helps, how shall I say, the idea of teamwork, because when you have a whole bunch of people with different skill sets and you bring them together in a team, it's not necessarily formed in a degree or a certification, but it's a whole laundry list of things that kind of bring that together.
That's great. I love that, the whole idea of, as someone walks out of getting a degree, or even getting any education, and they walk into their employer, if it's someone that's new to that place or someone that's been there for a while, having the ability as the employer to say, okay, this person has come in with this skill set, so not only are they qualified for what I want them to do, but now I know I don't have to continue to train them on this. I can take them maybe to that next level, right? So it also helps the employer kind of know where they are. So I'm going to shoot it over to UMass Global on either Laura or Margaret. If you want to talk a little bit about kind of the way UMass has looked at micro-credentialing and that y'all developed.
Absolutely. I think I can speak to that. And Margaret, if you have additional things you want to share, that'd be great. One of the things that we practically have been doing, in addition to what Robert just very well articulated, sort of the difference between a micro-credential and certificate and how it's used in our academic space to, build curriculum bridges with some of our business partners. in addition to our students. What we've essentially done is been able to, once micro-credentialing sort of came on the scene, we were actually able to, through an assessment, understand that the CBE program is as I mentioned before, one of the easiest pathways to do that. And so rather than deconstructing a 16-week course or an 8-week course, because the CBE STREP platform were based on objectives as opposed to timeframes, we were able to break down and deconstruct some of those learning objectives into smaller, achievable, and sort of micro-credentialed steps towards an actual, course, which means that if we deconstruct those down into smaller pieces, instead of getting a 3-credit class, the students get a badge, they get a competency that they've learned, team building or teamwork, things like that. Which is a part of one of our classes. They might qualify for some academic credit, but if they continue to build their academic credit while also at the same time or simultaneously building some of the competencies that are required in the workplace. Some of our business partners that we've been able to do some of these things with, one of them is what's called MGB, which is the Brigham Institute of Hospital Systems. So we've actually built specifically for upskilling some of their lower level employees that might be an entry level janitorial type, for example. They want to keep those employees. They want to invest in those employees. So what we've done is built a program for them to upskill into potentially management type of positions using our CBE and STREP program. It works like a micro-credential because as the students continue to build their competencies, they also build academic credit, as well as potentially new professional opportunities. So it becomes a very, very win-win opportunity for a lot of our own students, but as well as some of our business partners.
Yeah, and Laura brings me to the equity piece, right? So you might be working somewhere in a janitorial role and you don't have time to finish the degree before you make more in your salary. So when you're getting micro-credentials, you're able to move up to that next higher paying role without completing the degree. And these little bite-sized micro-credentials, they can lead to the degree. They're a great pathway into that. But the benefit is that you're upskilling as you're moving along. So employers see you have those skills, but you don't need that degree as you're coming up. So it's really wonderful if you have a family and you need to make that salary. I have a friend who's just did a micro-credential. She's an executive and she's really intimidated by getting that degree, but she was able to get a micro-credential and it got her feet wet with school, and she's able to be more comfortable and get those skills. Hopefully it'll lead to that degree later on, but that's just one example of how it can be beneficial.
So there's a lot of things that y'all said that I'm in my head going, oh, I want to talk more about that. One of the things that I think it was Robert, I think it was you that you were talking about this idea of the soft skills. And I think even Laura and Margaret also talked about, that idea that how do you see a soft skill, right? Sometimes it's really hard to determine, is someone troubleshooting? Is someone, what are they thinking? And I think it was you, Robert, and I would love you to talk a little bit more about it, but the idea of really being able to break that down and almost document what that soft skill is. So can you talk a little bit about how you pull that into those micro-credentials or even those courses to help not only students, because sometimes students have a hard time determining what does that look like, or how can I build that?
Well, that's definitely not a softball there, so appreciate that. All right. So how do I equate? I'm going to use the term leadership. So there's several different, how do you demonstrate leadership, right? The idea there, and not to say that U of L is doing this, but I think that we're attempting to get to this point where once we start identifying these specific competencies that build leadership, what we're looking at doing is really kind of building some sort of training or course, very small course that's stackable to the point where you've demonstrated leadership in a specific idea. So the idea here is it comes time, the best way to explain it in what little time we have is creating a stackable credential program based off of individual competencies that develop a much larger soft skill. So, leadership is, if we're using that as the umbrella and we're talking about, communications, then underneath communications, there could be public speaking, there could be individual one-on-one written communication. How do you demonstrate your ability to do those? Well, then you can stack those up to build, and then just kind of creates its own little pyramid. Now, that's just a broad example of how you could potentially do it, but the idea here is with CBE is identifying the competency they want the student to demonstrate, build a course around the idea that particular student is going to be able to demonstrate that competency at the end, and then that becomes a micro-credential that can be included in a much larger type of certificate program or something along those lines, or its own larger badge. For example, one of the things that we did in this realm with our cybersecurity program that was sponsored by the NSA was that we built all this curriculum. We built 24 different modules to develop. Then what we did is we kind of bundled them and say, okay, well, it takes a long time to get to this big certificate or this big training. But if we do the cloud bundle, we do the networking bundle, we do, foundational bundle, the security bundle, we created a bunch of smaller badges up underneath it that just kind of pyramid to the top. So that way it gave students an opportunity to, instead of going after the big thing at once, they went after the smaller ones first, and then those just came together to be the bigger one. So soft skills can be built in exactly that same way, identifying, what it is that you want them to demonstrate in this area, and then all the other areas that roll up to it, and, just kind of build it up from there. So did that answer your question, Rhonda?
Yeah, no, that was perfect. That was great. Because I love the idea of really breaking it down, right? How can you really take this, something that seems huge, and breaking it down into these smaller pieces? And the idea, I love going to a corporation, or even finding, when you were using the example of leadership, finding different leaders in different fields, if it's military, if it's a corporation, or if it's in a school, wherever it is, and finding out from them what does that mean, and how do you know someone has that? And I think that's part of the CBE way of doing things. What are those smaller smaller competencies and sub-competencies that you would look at to then pull them together to build out those micro-credentials? So I think one of the things that all of y'all have talked about is the idea that there are some people that come into, or are afraid to come into certain training opportunities, right? If it's a degree or if it's a bigger certification. But all of you have said, well, if we break these down and have these bundles or these smaller units that someone can go in and be successful, and maybe they weren't really successful when they were going through school, and so they didn't really want to go back, but it gives them that confidence. So I think, Margaret, I think you were talking a little bit about that with your friend that was like, oh, I can actually do this. Can you expand on that a little bit more, on when you're thinking through building out courses or programs, or even these micro credentialing things? How would you think about that and do that for that success?
Yeah, so as Laura was talking about, one of the main things is building those relationships with business leaders and seeing what they're looking for, what jobs are open that they're not able to fill that they need to have those, employees with those skills. So developing relationships with them. And I've been pretty successful in this with introducing people to University of Massachusetts Global. I have one friend who's a healthcare executive, and he was very excited to help our school find out what skills were needed. And so we could build the competencies and micro-credentials around that. And it was just one example of someone who was really influential in building some of our programs. So, as they say, a lot of it just comes down to relationships. So involving the faculty is really important as well. So the faculty have a lot of expertise and knowledge about how to best teach these students. And so we like to have the faculty give their expertise. There's a lot of autonomy in building these competencies and micro-credentials. I've built some, and it's when you have that experience in the field and you're able to apply that into creating these programs and micro-credentials, that's invaluable. And then it comes also to having a great innovation with the Strut platform, as we mentioned, having all the developers put those competencies and micro-credentials online so they're in a pleasing aesthetic manner, and they're fun to use. And that also brings me, I know this is not exactly in line with what you were asking, but when we talk about badging and showing people that they have these micro-credentials, that's another aspect that needs to be aesthetically pleasing as well. I come from a marketing design background, so I like to see the competencies micro-credential platform, and when they showcase these credentials that they look good, and so they're excited about them.
Yeah, I love that. Sometimes going into the platform and starting to work through it, like you're saying, Margaret, it's like if it looks inviting or if it looks like where to go and what to do and where are you in that process, sometimes it makes it a little easier for people that are a little weary about the idea of either going back to school or getting a credential or even doing learning, right? So Laura, if you could, I know you talked a little bit about it, as Margaret said, about how did you go about building these micro-credentials or smaller units? I know y'all started off many times as, this is our degree program, but then how did you kind of take a step back and kind of walk us through that process of, who did you talk to? What did you do? What did that look like for you?
Yeah. Well, the key term for us when we started wasn't micro-credentials, it was stackable credentials. So that was really what kind of got us started on this notion of how do we create more and more effective entry points for potential students, as well as employees. We have an arm of our institution, which we call extended education, and it's specifically professional development. We saw a trend happening where the extended ed offerings were moving more and more towards offering through CBE platform. And COVID was helpful in building momentum that direction, because I think before that we had held in-person webinars and different professional training opportunities for some of our local business partners. And so it was kind of a combination of things, with the idea of how do we stack our credentials? How do we make what we offer slightly more appealing and more effective in a professional development setting? then the notion of micro-credentialing came on the scene, and we were kind of moving that direction anyway, but that turned our attention towards the academic side of the house, not just professional development. And so we had already built out these undergrad programs, a BBA in our CBE program and an MBA in CBE program. Well, we looked at, well, if we take, bundle some of those, we can give certificates in leadership, as Robert just mentioned. Well, we can even break those down even further and create opportunities for badging and competency development. So it just became, I used the word before, deconstruct, and it really was deliberate deconstruction of a big intentional 2.5-year program to how do we make learning happen in a smaller time frame that is appealing to all of our various stakeholders, which might be students as well as professional developments. How we went going about doing that was kind of complicated, but we used a team of our faculty as well as some of our marketing. We had some marketing people in there as well. They kind of knew what was happening, what our students wanted, things like that. But it was, they weren't decision makers, but they were definitely a source for information for us. And that was a really helpful tool as well. And so it became a sort of a what was doable, how can we break down what we've already built, what needs to be redone so that it can be applicable in that way, and then how do we bundle what we already have essentially that can be effective and retool. We've come up with some really creative solutions for this. And what we've also done, and this is what's so great as well, is we've taken some of our bundles of professional development and that extended ed that was not academic credit, and we've now pulled them into a CBE platform and created situations where there's stackable options that are both academic credit as well as professional development. So it's gone both ways, which has been a surprise and a welcome surprise for us to be able to do that. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, that was great.
Okay.
Because I think some people, especially when they are already in a school and they already have their academic programs, and they may even have professional development or extended ed, but how do you kind of step into that realm? And Robert, I know that y'all do a lot with outside entities from to work with them to see if it is an academic group, but also if it's an outside group that can is thinking maybe a micro-credential or some kind of skill building program can help. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I know at one point you mentioned this difference between certification and like these micro-credentials and would love for you to kind of get a little bit more into that as well.
That's a two-part question. So I'll answer the easy part first, and then you can give me a little more clarity on the second part. So the difference between certification and micro-credentialing as far as where U of L is sitting. And it's also personal to me because I hold a PMP certificate and I hold a SHRM CP certificate as well from when I graduated. But the idea here is this: a certification is sponsored by a private organization that requires a baseline of training to initially apply for certification. And then you have to take a test that's usually 4 hours long. And then and then you get awarded, if you pass the test, a certification like project management professional, for example, from PMI, that's for 3 years. And they're like, for anybody that doesn't know, I'm pretty sure most do, PMI is the gold standard when it comes to project management methodology. So earning the PMP certification from their org is considered high level. And then you have to do, in that 3 years, you have to do at least 60 professional development continuing education units in order to keep your certification beyond that. So it works with SHRM CP, CompTIA, some of these other high technical certs are also the same way, but they're sponsored by private orgs. The microcredential is something that's really can be built by anybody. It can be built by any institution, and it's really kind of designed to specific purpose. It's not a broad range of method, a broad range of skill sets under there, and it's usually not as expensive as something like a PMP or anything like that. It's usually kind of can fit within. The way we're trying to fit it in is within our curriculum, as I mentioned before, but also in partnerships with corporate organizations for what we call U of L branded badging. And I think this one might answer, let me have you clarify your second question, because I think where I'm going might also answer that. So did that answer the difference between the way we view micro-credentialing and certification?
Definitely, because I think some people get confused about what are all of these words and what do they actually mean. So I think that was nice to be able to kind of see that difference. But when you're building out these micro-credentials, that partnership that you may have with another group, again, if it's a group on campus, if it's another organization, maybe even a company. So I know you've done a little bit of that, or a lot. Can you talk about what that looks like as in your group?
Sure. So I guess that's like multifaceted, right? So just if the College of Business comes to us and says, we want to incorporate this into our executive ed program and we want to put it on Strut as competency-based, they've already got the curriculum. So all we really have to do is get them in touch with a designer, and they help us break that down and, establish what is the competency that's designed there. In our corporate ventures, where we want our external partners, such as Humana and UPS, just to name a few here in Louisville, or Yum, they come to us and typically say, this is what we need. Can you help us develop it? And then, it's all based off that initial needs assessment. And then we determine whether or not, collectively, and the powers that be do that. They just give it to me to execute. So to be clear, when the contract gets put in place, say we need this training, I'm going to use leadership again. We want this type of information tied to our industry. Can you use your subject matter experts to help us build something for it? And then when we do, we slap a badge on it and we call it a U of L branded micro-credential in partnership with that particular org. And the org, in some cases, will incentivize their people to go after it by, like getting the further training, maybe even paying for it, and stuff like that. So that way that they're investing in their particular, employee population. And that's kind of a big talk right now. It's like, why do we need to hire new people instead of investing in our force that we already have? So micro-credentialing is kind of driving that workforce initiative into investing in building skills within the workforce they already have, so they don't have to continually go out and try to find somebody new to fill that skill set. I mean, it's like an evolution, right? It's just kind of growing from one set to the next. But the bigger talk that we're, hearing is that corporations now are finding more value in trying to invest in their employee population through micro-credentialing than they are trying to figure out how to hire somebody else to come in with the set of skills that they're doing. So if they can build a set of skills or the courses that develop the skills, then they can put their own people through it at no cost to the employee. And then they're building from within, and then they can hire lower level positions as they promote their current group of people to take those higher responsibilities. So it's just, there's multi ways to do it, but that's just kind of a few examples of how we do it. I particularly like when a unit comes to us with the curriculum already built, because that's easier to implement and it goes faster. But as far as, building stuff like that, the corporate world is starting to realize that we need to invest in our current people. How do we do that, and how do we make it attractive and achievable? So
No, I love that.
I was just going to say, to Robert's point, studies show that students are enrolled in these programs, particularly a Lumina study. They're much more likely to get promoted within their organizations. And, as you were saying, it's so invaluable to be able to bring people up rather than bring new people in.
Yeah, and I agree. To add to that is in higher ed, it also microcredentials we're finding value in that they're a pathway to a degree. So those adults that have started school and never finished get the taste like your friend did with the microcredential piece, and then may want to, grab, okay, this is not so hard. I can go ahead and I can, try the degree route. So we're also looking at that as a marketing strategy to not only bring all those former people who don't have a degree into our tuition programs through some of our continuing ed and micro-credential programs offerings, hopefully, to just kind of drive, more of a tuition base from there. But ultimately, it's really the corporations that are deciding to invest in their workforce is what's really kind of driving some of that change.
And I think, as someone was mentioning earlier, it's a little easier with the accreditation as well, right? Laura and Robert, you might be able to talk to that a little more.
When you say it is easier, what's it?
The micro-credentialing.
The micro-credentialing is easier. Gotcha. Yeah, the Department of Ed is sometimes a little tricky to work with. It depends on the percentage of changes you're making to the programs that were originally approved and that sort of thing. So you have to track the types and number of changes that might be made when you're deconstructing a curriculum into a micro-credential. Certificates are definitely something that you still need to, if you create a certificate from a program, that you would need to get approval for. Micro-credentials still, I think, sort of fall under that umbrella, but it is definitely easier, but it is still tricky. Just make sure you're, following through on all of those different guidelines and rules.
Definitely. One of the things that Robert said was the idea that, employers are really actually starting to invest again in their employees, right?
Mm-hmm.
And helping them grow. And, part of that is, one, it's cheaper for an employer to keep an employee, even if it's training them on different things, because bringing in a brand new person is very expensive, all the way from recruitment to onboarding to making sure they know what they're doing. But the other part of that, I think, is also for the employer or anyone that is wanting to do micro-credentialing, is the idea that as the different workforce goes through those micro-credentials within your company, that everyone's kind of on that same page, right? They all have those same skill sets. And so as you build out your company, if it's, helping move people up and helping them get promoted, but also knowing that the next person that's coming up will be able to get that same training and be able to continue that cohesiveness throughout the company to make sure that everyone is doing the same thing in the right direction and for the company. So I love the micro-credentialing for that, and that companies want to then partner with academic institutions that know how to put a lot of this together, right? And do that. So Laura, I know that UMass Global has done a lot of partnering with companies. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and how has that changed or brought about more of the micro-credentialing for y'all?
Yeah, absolutely. We do. Walmart is one of our partners, and working with them to continue to support their investment in their employees. And that's really where we come in. Their intention is to cultivate and develop and build the competencies within their workforce. And that you mentioned, it's definitely worth the investment to keep your employees not only happy, but also growing and professionally, giving them those opportunities as they look elsewhere. You want them to look elsewhere within, if you can. And so we're part of that initiative that they have on helping to support, develop, and help their current employee and workforce develop in their competencies. And we do that through, there's a lot of micro-credentialing that's happening as well. But it's mostly, again, through our CBE platform, just because, as you know, Walmart is everywhere. And being able to offer programs that are self-paced, that are accessible and available, that aren't time-stamped, meaning there isn't a specific due date and there isn't that deadline looming. Students are able to work through the competency at their pace and their scale, and also get out of it what they're hoping to get out of it. And so that's been a really great opportunity for us to help build with the Walmart student in mind, what the Walmart students need. MGB is another example. We actually designed a program for their specific student base that would be coming through the program. And then we made it general, but then we also have the opportunity, because we're able to create flexible curriculum through this micro-credentialing system and CBE program, that we're able to tailor what we're offering to not only a general population student or company, but also tailor it specifically for some of our business partners, which we've done with Walmart as well as MGB, for example.
Yeah, that's wonderful. As you were talking, one of the things that also came to my mind was the idea that, with those micro-credentials already in place, if maybe a student or someone knows that, okay, I just got laid off, I want to upskill, and I know that Walmart actually utilizes this training for their employees, then they may be able to kind of get that leg up. It's like, okay, I'm going to go through it. I may have to pay for it myself because I'm not part of Walmart yet. But if I get those skills that Walmart obviously treasures in their employees, then they can actually maybe get in. Okay, I already have all these credentials that you already offer, to your employees. And so, do y'all hear that when you are talking with different employers? Or
I don't think I necessarily would hear that, just in the position that I'm in, because I don't have a lot of direct contact with students, especially individual students that are interested in enrolling. I do have a lot of contact with students, but it's not necessarily on the interest side of they're already typically students when I have that kind of interaction. But I will say you bring up a really, really important point. And we've talked about how to build, why to build micro-credentials, the structure, who's involved in that conversation, and how we continue to serve learning in this new sort of way of learning. And so we've done all that. But what's so important is what ends up on a student's resume. That is really, really important. While we say this, we're going to stamp this micro-credential on your resume, you can identify different competencies that you've been specifically trained in, which is excellent on a resume to be able to have that. It makes you stand out in various ways. And that is, I think, the really important focal point of why micro-credentials are so important, because it's helping to build a resume that is interesting, attractive, and helps get students into positions of being able to apply for jobs they couldn't normally have applied for, or be ready, most important, for jobs that they wouldn't normally have been ready for. And that, I think, is the most important part, is that we are meeting the needs of, the workplace is different. People change jobs 13 to 26 times in a career now, when our grandparents or our grandparents changed maybe once or twice, right? And so we have to, as educational society, like educational structures, we have to be able to meet students where they're at and be able to help them achieve the professional development goals that they have for themselves through academia. And micro-credentialing is by far and none one of the most important ways right now that we've been able to do that.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Laura. And I do have the contact with the students, and it's rewarding when I hear that they got a promotion or they're really excelling in their job because of the skills that they're learning in these programs. I have one student who worked at Walmart, and she didn't want to work there long term, as you were saying, Rhonda. She also worked part-time in a school, and she wanted to work in education. And she was using the Walmart education to get ahead in that. And that's one thing that's really amazing about these companies is a lot of times with these offerings, they would like the employees to stay, but they're giving these educational opportunities for success either there or elsewhere, which is pretty remarkable. I also wanted to, would you like me to talk a little bit the faculty perspective working in this platform?
Definitely.
Okay, yeah. So the Strut platform, it is really amazing in how it enables us to have these one-on-one relationships with students. We're constantly going back and forth, and it's a lot better in some ways than being in a big lecture hall where you maybe get to talk to the faculty member once or twice. You're having constant interaction with the faculty member, and they're a lot of times just as qualified as someone in that lecture hall. So it's a pretty unique and amazing opportunity for those students. Also, with the workflow from a faculty perspective, to be able to have the queue of work. And for us, we get back to the students within 24 to 72 hours. And so being able to see that queue and see if we're over that time limit is invaluable. Everything's in one place. And I have so much going on in my life that it's so nice to have those students in one little area. So grateful to your team for designing all that and making our lives easier.
I love to hear that. And yeah,
I just want to add real quick because I do teach in that MGB upskill program. I teach that program. And so there are several ESL students actually that are in that program. And this process of learning that we have developed through Strut and with CBE has been extremely valuable, specifically for our ESL students, because we are able to have individual pacing of the program. And then we are also able to understand where their limitations are and address those directly, as opposed to dealing with a group of students and just giving a C and then moving on to the next assignment, where students are able to take a couple of attempts. And we're able to see, I am able to see progress in student learning, like how to use APA. I have several students, they have never used PowerPoint before, right? And it's PowerPoint, I get it, right? It's not great, but it's technology that we are learning to introduce into their repertoire and their professional competency. And once they learn how to do PowerPoint, they build the confidence that they need to tackle new technologies and different technologies and additional technologies, and add that. So I have found that this individual and different attempts and pacing has been really, really helpful to those particular groups of students as well. So I just want to add that.
No, I love that. Yeah, it's, one of the things that, I guess people don't always think about when, students are going to go through a CBE program is they are building that skill set, right? There are specific skills that they are looking at, you're assessing them, but you're also kind of guiding them through that process, right? And I think that's a lot what y'all are saying is like, I know exactly where my student is and I know what they are doing and how can I get them there? So when you think about these micro-credentialing, it also allows you to take students that are going through like a smaller chunk of stuff and making sure that they're getting through that, instead of, oh, this huge degree or this huge thing that I want them to get through. Let's focus in on more of what exactly is that competency or skill that they need to work on, to be successful. And so, I think that's one of the things that when it does come to microcredentialing, because you can determine what are that grouping of skills or sub-skills that you can put together that allows someone to come out on the other side with this repertoire of ways to do something new or upskill what they already did. So how do you kind of validate that? What does that look like when it comes to the courses that y'all put together, or the competencies?
So we have rubrics that we grade by. So it's pretty black and white whether they know the material or not. And so it's easy to grade when we look at the rubric. It'll be either you used APA or you didn't use APA. And that's where Laura was talking about the second attempt. If you, if you didn't use APA, then you get, not passing on that. And then you return it to the student, and then they get to try again until they know the APA, because you're walking them through it. And as you talked about, giving students different aspects of soft skills to work on. So one might be the oral communication, another might be the interpersonal communication. And so they're slowly getting these as they move along. So the one thing about the intersection of competency-based and these micro-credentials is that you're able to see them progress, and you're able to see whether they know the material or not. And it's really black and white. So when an employer sees that badge that they have gotten through this material, it's really good for the employer, because they do in fact have those skills, because they can't pass if they don't have them.
That's great. So when you think about stuff like that, and these can happen anywhere. I mean, I think Robert said that it's like anyone can put these together, right? And it could be at a company, it could be within an academic institution. But when you think about micro-credentialing within like higher ed, what is that fit? Where do they fit? I mean, I know a lot of people when they first, CBE's been around forever, right? And when we, every time I turn around, I'm, someone else is trying to get into CBE, but when they really try to sometimes put it into the academic degree programs, it gets difficult, because a lot of times, because of accreditation and the different things and the A, B, C, D, instead of actually you mastered it or you didn't master it, right? But I think that being able to put it in a place, sometimes within a higher ed institution, I think, Robert, y'all's group did that really well, to be able to allow people, allow that true, pure CBE to come through with that. Would love for you to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I would tell you that it wasn't easy. So just to give everybody the context of what Rhonda is referring to. So first, one of the largest organizations in the U.S. is the U.S. military. Their entire enlisted training structure is built off competency-based education. It's the go, no-go environment, right? The whole idea of if you can't get it right the first time, you try and try again until you develop it. And then, in their world, you may save a life, right? So in higher ed, we face the challenge of taking and creating our cybersecurity curriculum using subject matter experts from within the higher ed atmosphere. And it was a challenge because, as educators, you guys all know, you like what you build and you don't want to change it, right? So teaching them to scale down things to a competency level from a learning objective, or even though they're very similar, getting them to say, okay, what do you want? I always ask them, okay, what do you want this particular student to demonstrate from this course? It's not about what it is that you talk to them about in theory and all that other background information that really enables the learning of our degree programs and that knowledge that you take with you. It's about, what do you want this particular student to demonstrate from here? This is what you need to focus on. So, and I got myself in a little bit of trouble every once in a while when I said, let's just remove the fluff, right? Let's take the fluff out of this and then focus on the competency, right? And that's just my military mind and the efficiency way I work. But it took a while, but eventually they came around. They were like, you know what? I understand exactly. I don't need to teach all this context if all I want to do is train on this skill. So what I found myself doing is saying, let's not talk about what we're teaching them. Let's talk about what we want them to train on. Okay. Because when you're developing the competency, it's what do you want them to train and then demonstrate. And then if they can't get it the first time, then they get to go back and do it again and do it again. And I think that's where we had a challenge getting our faculty to understand it's not about passing a test that you can memorize the answers to. It's about what you can take from the course and go out and implement in the world. So understanding, where I think CBE and where Microcredentials comes into higher ed is helping translate that big educational package into some relatable, demonstratable skills. And that's where there's a disconnect. And that's why employers are asking these days. It's like, okay, great, you got a degree from U of L or wherever, but what can you do? When it comes down to, don't tell me what you learned, tell me what show me what you can do, because that's what I need, right? If I need to put you in leadership, then that education is great to have because there's a whole lot of context involved within it. But it's all about what you can do. So, that is where I think higher ed has to kind of, everybody's talking about this higher ed cliff, this cliff that's coming, right? I don't know if it's coming or not. I'm aware of it, but I'm working in workforce. So my job is to develop our workforce initiatives and really kind of build off of this idea that not only do we want our students to achieve a degree in an education, we want them to be able to go out and demonstrate and be useful in the workforce as fast as possible. So I think that's where they kind of, before they were like completely separate, but now I think that the conversation is we have to bring them together, because our students who are competing for the same jobs are in some cases getting overlooked by people with the experience and the skills to be able to do the job. So there's a difference between, I have the degree, I should be able to get this job, but now degrees are becoming more of minimum qualifiers, not necessarily the reason, and then when they put the statement in there, it says you want to have a degree or 3 or more years of experience in this type of work, and we'll move the degree aside and we'll take the experience over it. So I think that's where higher ed needs to make that merge. They need to understand it's not only about what they're teaching, but it's about what the students can do after they're done with the teaching. So my 2 cents.
No,
it was a challenge.
Yeah. No, I love that. I, always think about, again, Robert, what you were saying is like, what is that competency? What is that skill that they need? And yes, Laura, backwards design. We love backwards design, right? Start with the end in mind and then figure out how do you know that they can do it or they have that. But I also love the fact that, within a platform, you can say, these are the things you need to learn. This is what you need to know. But if you want to learn more about it, here's additional resources, right? Doesn't mean you can't give them additional stuff if they want to go out there and learn more about it. But, what are the things that you need to do to go through it? Well, it looks like unfortunately, I've loved this conversation. We're at the end of time, but I definitely want to so much thank my panel Robert Kubash, Margaret Moodian, and Laura Galloway on coming together with me to really talk about microcredentials, CBE. What does that look like? How do we get into it? And how do we continue to move forward with it? So thank y'all so much. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. Strut Learning always loves to be able to get together and really talk about how to move forward with CBE. Next month, look forward to our next webinar. We are going to be talking about gamification in CBE and what does that look like. So again, thank you everyone, and hope y'all have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
Dr. Brown. Bye.